Wake up, get ready, time to shine, it's your day. Yeah. Join team together, making dreams come true. In the zone
As I've done with a few other people here, I've uh, I've helped them with their deck, and I help Chris with her, with her deck. And the interesting thing is, um, when I first volunteered her for this, because I know she's on her KPIs is in fact to start speaking. I said, what would you like to talk about? I said, I first met her in 2019 when she started the sourcing function at M&T Bank. We have a couple of M&T beers and former M&T beers in the audience right now. And, so we tossed around some ideas and we thought that perhaps a retrospective, 2019 to present, how did the changing environment impact talent sourcing, and what are the possible lessons learned from that? Now, I will not do the same job as she will. Um, I might be a little more risque with my language, so every folks here who know me, you will appreciate that. So the Kristen Lucia, Senior Manager Talent Sourcing, she would be talking about talent sourcing between 2019 and 2025, and what lessons were learned. A few things about her, and I know you can hear this. She's in Buffalo, and I want this. This is what the lake was like off of Buffalo, but a few weeks ago. She's obviously a fan of the Buffalo Bills. If you like buffalo wings, man, they started in there. To my friends up in Buffalo, I still think Gabriel's Gate is the place for wings. But this is what she has to, and what the bank has to deal with, relocating people to Buffalo. So on that, I will stop this annoying slide for you. So a little bit about Chris. She actually has a few decades of sourcing and recruiting, and that might be an understatement. She's experienced when it comes to sourcing and recruiting. I know she began on the agency side, has been at the bank for 20 some odd years, has been behind some of the innovative changes to TA at the bank. As I said, she built the first sourcing team at M&T Bank. I know for a fact she hates snow. So why she's in Buffalo? She's from the area. She's in Buffalo. She's a sand and surf kind of girl. As she says, her best accomplishment and her biggest, source of agita is her daughter. I've met her daughter. I can agree with that. And this would have been her very first time speaking at any type of event like this. So, for anyone who wants to speak at these in the future, this platform is great for that. Okay, so this is the agenda. This is what we're going to talk about in the next couple of minutes. 2019 essentially was a traditional talent sourcing. 2020, we saw the impact of the pandemic. 2021, the Great Resignation. 2022, this surge in skills-based hiring. 2023, a much, much tighter labor market. 2024, an expansion of automation and analytics. And finally, here in 2025, this AI-driven and skills-focused era. And at the very end, we're going to talk about what leadership lessons she learned from this. So those of us who've been around for a few years, we remember what traditional talent sourcing was like. This is a community that began in the late 1990s, where many of us had a hacker mentality, and most of the stuff that you use in sourcing right now. I'm looking at you, Aquaman. I'm looking at you, Martel. If you're in here, it's a lot of the things that you learned was essentially created by a community over 25 years ago. But back in 2019, there was still a heavy reliance on job boards, even though sourcing had been around, and some of the conferences were getting 800 plus people in real life to attend them. Most sourcing strategies involved around traditional, the LinkedIns, the Indeeds, the Monsters, Career Builders. As an aside, Monster and Career Builder aren't doing too well now. David, congratulations on jumping onto the Indeed bandwagon again. There was limited use of AI and automation. A good amount of manual candidate screening dominated, paper forms, Avature, one of the things that we were doing back then was we were doing both a Workday implementation and an Avature implementation at the same time, trying to add more, put more automation and efficiency into the process. And it was still, it was heavily passive candidate outreach was primarily through cold LinkedIn messages with very little personalization. Um, Not a whole lot of use of the phone, not a whole lot of use of texting. And then 2020 comes along, and we're starting to towards the end of the impact of the pandemic, the shift to remote hiring. Virtual sourcing became the norm. It changed how sourcing was done. More video interviews rather than in-person meetings. Uh, there was an increased demand for remote-ready talent. Whereas in the past, like M&T Bank, it was look, if you wanted to work for the bank, you had to relocate to Buffalo. The relocation benefits were substantial. They were really good, but there were some challenges there. Um, so the pandemic, you, since you could work from anywhere, there was this massive surge in employer branding, and companies had to highlight what was great to work for them in spite of this burgeoning pandemic. 2021, the Great Resignation. This was good because, um, people were leaving. If you could work anywhere, then you could be recruited to anywhere. And the focus then became on employer retention and also rehiring, boomerang hiring. I've always been a big fan. I know Chris has always been a big fan of boomerang hiring. And so sourcing strategies to target alumni, former employees, amidst all this high turnover became the norm and the focus. Who do you know who's worked here in the past? They may have worked here 10 years ago. That means they've got 10 more years of experience. What are they doing now? It meant going back into your ATS, your CRM, whatever your data store was, and trying to refresh the data. There was a greater emphasis on flexibility. Um, you know, People were just demanding more flexible schedules, more hybrid work models. Um, Starting work at 10 or starting work at 7, working for 2 hours, doing things, whatever the case may be. I know during that period, I think I did a good amount of dad taxi, in certain parts of the day. So these were real entities that we had to deal with. Um, the expansion of talent pools, I think, was probably, despite the great resignation, causing massive amounts of agita in TA groups, the expansion of the talent pools away from simply a regional thing to a national thing uh, really increase the number of quality human beings into our systems. And of course, with more people comes greater responsibility. And so then the challenge then was to try to find a way to engage people who were in the community. That was one of the fantastic offshoots of the Great Resignation. In 2022, we saw this surge in skill-based hiring. Um, we saw declines in degree requirements. Sourcing moved away from, and not everywhere, because everybody in the chat here knows or has worked for companies where they continue to require degrees. You must have 8 years of experience for this. Must have, must have, must have, rather than focusing on the skills or the experiences that even in your short period of time that enabled you to deliver on the problems that you were hiring for. Abdullah, hearing all this makes me think that we are not getting paid enough. I don't think there's anybody in this chat who would disagree with that statement. So, if we could star that, I think we should. The rise of gig and freelance platforms, you know, from a sourcing standpoint, Upwork, Fiverr, um, every major job board began to find ways to take advantage of staff augmentation, skill-based work, project work. Uh, at that time, we were starting to see, and I'm trying to go back, Dan, you may want to help me, the Hire Easies of the world. Hire Easy might have been it wasn't the first one to present to exhibit at these large conferences, but it Hire Tool, yes, it was Hire Tool at the times. Thank you, David. But we saw platforms that uh, came on the market that allowed, you know, anyone, it almost democratized, sourcing in a way to find people that were not on LinkedIn, that were not on job boards, that were hidden here or hidden there, using all the breadcrumbs that were out there in on the internet. So we saw more enhanced. It was just the beginning of the AI era. There's a saying that we use: if it's written in Python, it's machine learning. If it's written in PowerPoint, it's AI. We were just starting to get there. Yes, Mr. Jackson, you will get copies of all the slide decks. So 2023, we starting a real tightening of the labor market. I don't need to remind people here that from 2023 on, the TA profession was significantly and severely impacted. No, not for 1999 plus tax, David. So I believe one of the most important things that came out of this 2022-2023 year was, in fact, compensation transparency, wage transparency. Um, it took the guesswork out. I don't know, show of hands. I'm curious by the people in there, but how many of you have always talked, compensation from the beginning of the search? I know I have. I will always. I'm not going to, BS people. I will always and have always told people this is what it is. If you can, demonstrate that your performance meets that, I don't care what you're making now, you're going to get a good offer if it goes to that. So, we have the competitive trace compensation transparency. By the way, we also saw, as a result of that, we saw some companies trying to skirt it. Some here may remember companies having a wage range from $0 to $2 million a year. There was always some funny business there, but it got better and better and better. DEI, man, I think that was one of the greatest um, successes during the past couple of years, was how we were sourcing for diversity. If you understand that, if you look at your customer base, and I know we had these conversations at M&T Bank, you look at at your customer base and you look at the diversity, you look at all the different, people there, and then you ask yourself, why isn't our workforce representative of that as best we can? And so, the emphasis on sourcing diverse candidates, people of color, Latino, Hispanic, depending on what you like, women, veterans, the LGBTQIA, etc., people on the spectrum, people with disabilities, the indigenous. They make up your customer base. So why shouldn't we incorporate that into our sourcing strategies? That just made everybody better. And finally, the increased role of social media. There's no doubt that from a branding standpoint, TikTok and the gram, they all impacted how we and how the bank marketed itself to the people out there. 2024, the expansion of automation analytics, hyper-personalized outreach. But by virtue of these AI sourcing tools, we're able to uncover things about people, novel things, and we're able to incorporate them, blend those with, whether it's an Avature or an Eightfold or whatever it is, incorporate those things into the outreach, so people feel that it's a one-on-one communication. Predictive analytics and sourcing, looking at all historical data. The team at M&T Bank, I know, was, they were expanding to include more talent intelligence stuff. And I personally put this under the category of talent intelligence. There was more of that. It makes no sense to spend all this money to have all this data if you're not going to analyze it. So always analyze the data. And finally, the greater role of employer reviews, Glassdoors and Indeeds and TikToks and, even on LinkedIn, we were starting to see more people talk about their experiences with a company. So these employer reviews are were very critical towards how talent sourcing evolved. So finally, here in 2025, this AI driven and skills focused era, the bank is seeing, and I know this because I talk to Chris pretty frequently. I talk to other people at the bank, even though I'm no longer there. Um, I know that they're using Chat GPT for sourcing purposes, for creating job descriptions. And mind you, it this is not propagated off the entire TA team, but there's a wave that's coming in. And I think that's the element to consider is, if you're a leader, it's, not everyone is going to embrace things at the same time. So, there is a diffusion into the organization. So it's something to consider. Real-time skills validations, being able to do things on the fly, things that you can incorporate into your video platforms, into your interviewing platforms. M&T Bank is a big Teams environment, and there are tools that are used to do this in real time. And which ones, and which incidentally brings to point, in this AI era, the biggest challenge is, we used to say, is it live or is it Memorex? Is the person you're speaking with, is it them, or are they using AI to answer things? This is much in the same way that, as we do this more and more, we'll be able to, recognize when these things are happening. So from a leadership standpoint, be aware that, for every, improvement that we make on the company side, people who are looking for work are incorporating similar type things on their side. And as David says, this huge increase in applicants using AI, and that's one thing that Chris and I spoke about on Friday. It's like, how do you then, know what's real? And is it a real person? Is it an AI agent? How do you assess, if it's so easy to use AI tools to apply, that means your candidate pool is massive. So what processes, procedures do you have in place to limit things, like do a 500-person cutoff and then review? If you need more, you do more. It's one solution, Abdullah. And then finally here, these decentralized marketplaces, looking into, especially from a banking standpoint, blockchain, investigating blockchain-enabled platforms to secure and access information about candidate profiles. We're seeing that in banking. We're starting to see that in TA, and these are things that are going to impact, TA strategies going forward. Anyway, so here, what were some of the leadership lessons that Chris learned during the course of this? Is, and we've heard this time again, never sweat the small stuff. It's if you're making progress and all you're doing is looking down at your feet, you're not going to see what's up ahead. Always, have lofty goals. As we say in engineering, fail fast, fail often, but get up and keep trying it again. No, and not exaggerate at all, David. Other thing is, embrace change. And banking is one of those industries that is somewhat reticent historically to embracing change. But I think everyone knows here that, the if you stand still, you're going to get run over. And it may be a bank, it may be a lot of old school, it may be heavily on the community focus, which M&T is. It's one of the most community-minded entities I know. But they still have to perform, and in order to perform, they need better people. So embrace whatever change is needed to get to where you need to go. Really stay current with sourcing and recruiting trends. It's very easy to turtle up or to ostrich yourself, stick your head in the sand, and not look at the trends. I know things like, recruiting brain food, Hung Lee's recruiting brain food, looking at, our recruiter therapy here every bi-weekly, innumerable things online, following people like our friend Glenn Cathy, or David or Brian Fink or Mike Wolford. Following these people, follow the speakers here, is they're going to talk. They're always they're experimenting. They're going to try to figure out ways to, you break things, you make them better. Fourth is lead by example. It's, you know, do as you say. If you're like for me, I won't ask anybody to do something that I won't do myself. And that is probably the best example. And mind you, you're going to fail. Sometimes there's a saying, sometimes you forget you're there to drain the swamp when you're up to your ass in alligators. We all go through that. But do your best and lead by example. If you say it, mean it. And finally, value diversity of thought. I'm not talking about this wild one flew over the cuckoo's nest type of diversity of thought, but if people have an idea, let them explain it. Do a proof of concept. Give them the audience, give them the platform to demonstrate their idea, and then give it legs and see what happens. Anyway, Daniel, that was my best Kristen Lucia imitation. This is Chris. That's her email. That's her LinkedIn.